I, 38M, have been married to my wife, 35F, for 14 years and we have 3 wonderful children together. Over the years, several major issues have pushed me to my breaking point, and I'm wondering if I'm wrong for considering divorce. About 9 years ago, I caught my wife having what she claims was just an emotional affair through texting. She swears they never met in person, but I've always suspected there was more that I couldn't prove. She begged for marriage counseling, which I agreed to primarily for our kids. During counseling, I did recognize where I went wrong. I had basically gone on autopilot in the marriage and checked out emotionally. This doesn't justify her cheating, which she admits was wrong, but we worked through it and things improved for a while. About 5 years after the affair, I discovered my wife had developed a dependency on her prescription medication. I missed the red flags initially, but it became obvious during a family vacation when she was high the entire time, ruining it for everyone. When confronted, she admitted she had a problem, we got her help, and things improved for a few years. Last year, she called me at work saying she had accidentally posted an inappropriate photo on social media. When I checked her phone, I found deleted conversations where she told someone to delete the photo. When confronted, she claimed it was an accident while using her camera to check something on her body. This felt suspicious since she has a habit of deleting conversations she doesn't want me to see. After that incident, we had a serious talk about how she'd been treating me dismissively, like I'm just a paycheck. Things improved briefly, but recently I noticed she's been going through her medication faster than prescribed. This past week was rough. She took so many meds that I was scared she'd pushed it too far. I stepped in and removed the remaining pills. I know I should have acted sooner. When she's not high, she's an amazing mother and wife, and has never put our kids in harm's way. I've confronted her again, and while she admits to being high and having an addiction, she's not taking it seriously this time. She thinks she can handle it without help. I can't afford rehab right now as I'm trying to improve our financial situation and launch several business ventures. Between her possible infidelity, addiction issues, my day job, and trying to start businesses, I'm stretched to my limit. I love her with all my heart, but my feelings are fading. I can't trust her anymore. I don't want to break up my family or hurt my kids, but staying might end up hurting them too. I'm not one to give up easily, but there's only so much I can take. I am thinking about divorcing my wife after all we've been through. I really don't want it to come to that, but I'm not sure what else to do. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that felt like a vice squeezing my skull. Emily was still asleep on the couch, sprawled out like nothing had happened. I stood there for a minute, watching her breathe, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. It's funny how memory works. Sometimes it's a lifeline. Sometimes it's a knife twisting deeper. I grabbed my keys and headed to work, figuring a few hours of routine might clear my head. Spoiler, it didn't. Driving through our quiet suburban neighborhood, I kept replaying the last 14 years in my mind. Emily and I met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's barbecue. She was this whirlwind of energy, laughing too loud, spilling her drink, apologizing with this goofy grin that made me want to know her. I was quieter back then, maybe a little too serious, but she pulled me out of my shell. We got married 2 years later, had our first kid a year after that. Life was good for a while, messy, chaotic, but good. I thought we were bulletproof. That's why the emotional affair hit me so hard 9 years ago. I've been working late a lot, trying to climb the ladder at my job, and I guess I left her feeling invisible. Still, finding those texts on her phone was like a punch to the gut. I remember confronting her in our bedroom, the kids asleep down the hall, my voice shaking as I asked who he was. She said it was some guy from her book club, that it was just dumb flirting, a way to feel seen. I wanted to believe her, but the way she kept deleting messages made me wonder what else she was hiding. Counseling helped us patch things up, but it left a crack in the foundation, one I kept hoping would heal over time. Work that day was a blur. I manage a small logistics team, and usually I'm good at keeping my head in the game, but my mind kept drifting. I'd catch myself staring at spreadsheets, thinking about that vacation 4 years ago when her addiction first reared its head. The kids had been so excited to swim in the lake, and I'd spent half the trip making excuses for why mommy was tired. I should have seen it sooner. The way she'd disappear to the bathroom for too long, the way her mood swung like a pendulum. When we got her help after that, I thought we'd beaten it. She'd come home from those support group meetings with this quiet pride, like she'd reclaimed herself. I was proud of her too, but pride doesn't last forever. By the time I got home that evening, Emily was up, sipping tea in the kitchen like it was any other day. The kids were at the table doing homework, and for a second, it almost felt normal. I asked her how she was feeling, trying to keep my tone neutral. She shrugged, said she was fine, that I was overreacting about last night. Overreacting. The word stuck in my throat like a splinter. I wanted to yell, to shake her, and ask how she could be so casual about nearly overdosing, but the kids were right there. So, I swallowed it down, told her we'd talk later. Later came after the kids were in bed. I sat her down in the living room, the same room where we'd had a million good moments, movie nights, Christmas mornings, all that stuff that keeps a family stitched together. I told her I'd taken the pills, that I couldn't watch her spiral again. Her face tightened, and she said I was controlling, that she didn't need me playing warden. I asked her why the bottle was almost empty when she'd just refilled it 2 weeks ago. She didn't answer. just stared at the floor, twisting her hands in her lap. That's when I brought up the photo from last year. I hadn't planned to, but it slipped out. I asked her point blank if there was someone else again, if that's why she'd been so distant. Her head snapped up, eyes flashing, and she said I was paranoid, that I'd never let the past go. Maybe she's right, I don't know. But the way she dodged the question didn't ease the knot in my chest. We went back and forth like that for a while, her deflecting, me pressing, until she finally stormed off to bed, leaving me alone with the ghosts of our arguments. I stayed up late again, digging through old memories, trying to figure out where the tipping point was. Was it the affair? The addiction? The photo? Or was it me, failing to hold us together? I pulled out my laptop and started researching divorce laws in our state, just browsing, not deciding. The words on the screen felt unreal. Custody, assets, mediation. I closed the tab fast, like I'd been caught doing something wrong. But the thought lingered, heavy and cold. As I crawled into bed beside her, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman I loved was slipping away. Or maybe she'd been gone for a while, and I was just too stubborn to see it. The shadows of our past were long, and they weren't letting go. The next few days were like walking through fog. Everything muffled, blurry, uncertain. Emily and I barely spoke, just traded the bare minimum to keep the house running and the kids fed. I'd catch her watching me sometimes, her expression unreadable, and I'd wonder what she was thinking. Was she mad? Scared? Did she even care? I couldn't tell anymore, and that scared me more than anything. Work became my escape, which is saying something because my job isn't exactly a picnic. I've been pushing to get these side businesses off the ground, a logistics consulting gig and an online store for outdoor gear, hoping they'd give us some financial breathing room. Debt's been creeping up on us for years, between the mortgage, the kids' activities, and Emily's medical stuff. I thought if I could just get ahead, maybe it'd take some pressure off her, off us. But lately, it felt like I was piling more bricks on my own back while she drifted further away. That Wednesday, I hit a breaking point. I'd been up late the night before crunching numbers for the consulting pitch, and I overslept. Emily didn't wake me. She said she didn't want to bother me, and I was late for a meeting with my boss. He didn't yell, but the look he gave me said enough. I spent the rest of the day playing catch-up, my phone buzzing with texts from Emily about mundane stuff, grocery lists, a reminder about the kids' soccer practice. It was so normal it almost felt fake, like we were pretending the last week hadn't happened. When I got home, the house was quiet. The kids were at a neighbor's, and Emily was in the backyard, sitting on the swing we'd built for our oldest when he was a toddler. I watched her through the kitchen window for a minute, the way she rocked back and forth, her hair catching the late afternoon light. She looked peaceful, almost like the old Emily. I grabbed 2 cups of coffee and went out to join her, figuring maybe we could talk without it turning into a fight. I handed her the mug, and she took it with a small nod. We sat there in silence for a while, the creak of the swing the only sound between us. I finally asked her what she wanted, really wanted, for us, for the kids. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the ground, tracing patterns in the dirt with her toe. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost fragile. She said she didn't know, that she felt lost, that the pills made everything quieter. It was the most honest she'd been in months, and it hit me like a freight train. I told her I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep waiting for her to figure it out while I held everything together. She looked up at me then, eyes wet, and asked if I was giving up on her. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to pull her close, promise we'd fix it, but another part was screaming to walk away before I lost myself too. I told her I needed her to get help, real help, not just promises. She nodded, said she'd think about it, and that was that. No big resolution, just a fragile truce. The rest of the week blurred by. I threw myself into work and the kids, trying to keep my mind off the what-ifs. But Friday night, something shifted. Emily came to me after dinner, said she'd called a rehab place, that she'd go if I could figure out the money. My heart leapt, hope's a stubborn thing, but then reality sank in. Rehab's expensive, and with my businesses still in the red, I didn't know how we'd swing it. I told her I'd make it work somehow, even though I had no clue how. That night, I couldn't sleep. I started Googling options, loans, payment plans, anything. Then, on a whim, I searched her name plus social media, thinking about that photo from last year. I don't know what I expected, maybe nothing, but what I found stopped me cold. There was an old profile of hers I didn't know about, locked down mostly, but one public post caught my eye. It was from months ago, a blurry selfie with a guy I didn't recognize, captioned, "Good vibes only." No context, no explanation, just enough to make my stomach drop. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Was this the guy from the affair? Someone new? Or just a friend I'd never met? I couldn't confront her without more, but the discovery lit a fuse I didn't know was there. Suddenly, every doubt I'd buried came roaring back. The deleted texts, the excuses, the way she'd pull away. I closed the laptop, my hand shaking, and made a decision. I'd dig deeper. Not out of spite, but because I needed to know what I was really fighting for, or if I was fighting for anything at all. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted but wired. The weight of my choices was crushing me, and I knew I couldn't carry it alone much longer. Whatever came next, I had to face it head on, even if it broke everything apart. The weekend hit me like a freight train I didn't see coming. I'd spent all night wrestling with that blurry selfie, Emily and some stranger, grinning like they didn't have a care in the world. It wasn't proof of anything, not really, but it was enough to keep me up, pacing the house, chasing shadows in my head. By Saturday morning, I was a mess, bags under my eyes, coffee going cold in my hand, and a growing itch to figure out what was real. Emily was cheerful that day, almost too cheerful. She made breakfast for the kids, pancakes with goofy faces drawn in syrup, and even hummed while she cleaned up. It threw me off. After the week we'd had, after her admitting she needed rehab, this felt like a performance. I watched her move around the kitchen, laughing with our daughter about some cartoon, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something big. I decided to test the waters. While the kids were distracted with their tablets, I asked her about rehab again casual, like it was no big deal. Her smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered fast, saying she'd call the place Monday, that she was serious this time. I nodded, told her I'd figure out the money, but my gut was screaming. She'd said stuff like this before, vague promises that never quite stuck. I needed more than words. That afternoon, I made an excuse to run errands and took her phone with me. I know, it's a lousy move, snooping like that, but trust was a ghost in our house by then. She'd left it on the counter, unlocked, which was sloppy for someone who usually deleted everything. I scrolled through her texts first, nothing jumped out, just chats with her mom, a friend from work, the usual. Then I checked her photos. Most were of the kids or random stuff around the house, but buried in the recently deleted folder was a string of selfies, her in a low-cut top, smirking at the camera. They weren't the checking a mark kind she'd claimed last year. These were posed, deliberate. My chest tightened. I kept digging, heart pounding, and found an email app she didn't use much. There, in the drafts folder, like she'd written it but never sent, was a message to someone named C. It was short, he's on edge again. Might need to push the plan sooner. Love you. No date, no context, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Push the plan? Love you? I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, staring at those words, feeling like the ground was crumbling under me. When I got home, Emily was napping on the couch, one of her pill bottles on the coffee table, empty. I'd locked the rest away, so this must have been a stash I didn't know about. She stirred when I walked in, groggy, and I asked her flat out where the pills came from. She mumbled something about a friend, that it was just to take the edge off, and I lost it. Not yelling, not yet, just this quiet, cold anger I didn't know I had in me. I asked her about the email, about C, about what she was playing at. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in years, I saw real fear in her face. She tried to spin it, said the email was old, from the affair days, that she'd never sent it, that I was blowing it out of proportion. But the pieces were snapping together too fast. The addiction, the photo, the dismissive way she treated me, it wasn't just chaos. It was calculated. I asked her if she'd faked the overdose scare, if she'd been playing sick to keep me from leaving. She didn't answer, just looked away, and that silence said more than words ever could. I stormed out to the garage, needing air, needing space. My mind was a tornado. Had she been manipulating me this whole time? Using the pills, the tears, the promises to reel me back in whenever I got too close to the edge? I thought about the affair 9 years ago, how she'd begged for counseling, how she'd turned it around on me being distant. Back then, I'd bought it, felt guilty even. Now, it felt like a script she'd rehearsed. I pulled up that old social media profile again, the one with the selfie. I couldn't message the guy without tipping her off, but I cross-checked the good vibes post date. It was from 6 months ago, long after she'd sworn she'd changed, long after the vacation meltdown. I started searching his name, Caleb, it turned out, on my phone, piecing together scraps from public posts. He was local, worked at a gym, had a history of flirty comments on her stuff before she locked everything down. It wasn't hard evidence, but it was a thread I couldn't unsee. By the time I went back inside, Emily was awake, sitting up, watching me like she knew the jig was up. I didn't confront her again, not yet. I needed more, needed to be sure. But the weight of it was suffocating. If she'd betrayed me this badly, if she'd twisted her addiction into a weapon to keep me trapped, then everything I'd fought for was a lie. And I wasn't sure I could forgive that, or myself for falling for it. Hashtag chapter 5, the mask slips. Sunday morning dawned gray and heavy, like the weather knew what was coming. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through every moment of the last 14 years, picking apart what was real and what might have been a lie. Emily's behavior yesterday, her deflection, her silence, had lit a fire under me. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry, determined to get answers. If she'd been playing me, using her addiction as a leash to keep me from leaving, I needed to know how deep it went. The kids were still asleep, so I kept things quiet. Emily was in the kitchen, sipping tea, acting like nothing had happened. I decided to push her, but carefully, I didn't want her shutting down again. I asked about Caleb, casual-like, mentioning I'd seen his name pop up somewhere. Her hand froze mid-sip, and she set the mug down too hard, the clink echoing in the silence. She said she didn't know any Caleb, that I must have mixed up names, but her voice was tight, her eyes darting to the side. I'd seen that look before, 9 years ago, when I'd first caught her texting. I didn't call her out yet. Instead, I said I'd been thinking about rehab, that I'd found a cheaper option a few towns over. Her reaction was instant. She perked up, nodded fast, said that sounded great, that she'd call them tomorrow. It was too eager, too rehearsed. My stomach twisted. If she was faking the addiction, or at least exaggerating it, rehab was the perfect cover. She'd go, play the part, come back, fixed, and I'd be the jerk who doubted her. I'd seen her pull this before, after the vacation mess, when she'd gone to meetings just long enough to convince me she was clean. I needed proof, something concrete. While she showered, I grabbed her laptop from the bedroom. She'd gotten sloppy with passwords lately, same one for everything, and I was in within minutes. Her email was a goldmine. Buried in a folder labeled recipes, clever, but not clever enough, were messages to Caleb stretching back years. Not just flirty stuff, plans. One from 2 years ago said, he's asking about the pills again. I'll up the dose, make him think I'm worse than I am. Another, from 6 months back, business stuff stressing him out. Perfect time to lean in. Lean into what? Keeping me distracted? Guilty? Trapped? My hands shook as I read on. There were gaps, deleted replies, probably, but the picture was clear. She'd been seeing this guy, off and on, since the emotional affair. The addiction wasn't fake entirely. She'd gotten hooked, sure, but she'd weaponized it, timed her slips, to pull me back whenever I got distant or suspicious. The overdose scare last week? A calculated move, judging by an email from 3 days before. He's pulling away. Need to shake him up. I felt sick. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a long game, a chess match I didn't even know I was playing. I copied the emails to my phone, logged out, and put the laptop back before she finished showering. When she came downstairs, I played dumb. Asked about her day, kept it light. She relaxed, thinking she'd dodged me again. But I was done being her pawn. That afternoon, I told her I had to meet a client for one of my businesses and left. Instead, I drove to Caleb's gym, his workplace from those social media scraps. I didn't go in, just sat in the parking lot, watching. Around 3 p.m., he walked out, tall, broad, laughing with some coworkers. I didn't recognize him, but the way he carried himself, confident, casual, matched the vibe of those emails. I snapped a quick photo, my hands sweaty on the steering wheel. It wasn't much, but it was something. Back home, I kept up the act. Emily was in mom mode, helping the kids with a science project, and I joined in, gluing paper volcanoes like my world wasn't imploding. My head was spinning, though. If she'd been this calculated, what else had she twisted? The photo last year, accident or bait? The affair, emotional or more? I started doubting everything, even the good days, wondering how much was real. That night, I confronted her again, this time with ammo. After the kids were in bed, I showed her the emails, calmly, no yelling. Her face went white, then red, and she tried to spin it. Said they were old, that Caleb was just a friend, that I was misreading it. But when I quoted the shake him up line, she faltered. For the first time, the mask slipped. She didn't cry, didn't beg, just stared at me like she'd been caught mid-heist. She admitted it, sort of. Said she'd loved Caleb for years, that she'd stayed with me for the kids, for stability, but I'd made it so hard, by pulling away. The pills? A mix of real dependency and theater, depending on what she needed me to believe. I asked why not just leave? She said she didn't know, that it got out of hand, that she never meant to hurt me this bad. It was the weakest excuse I'd ever heard, and it broke something in me. I walked away, locked myself in the guest room, and sat there, numb. The woman I'd loved, fought for, was a stranger, and I'd been her mark. The mask was off, and I wasn't sure what was left underneath. The guest room felt like a bunker that night, cold, quiet, and suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, replaying Emily's half-confession over and over. She'd loved Caleb for years, twisted her addiction into a tool, kept me tethered with guilt and lies. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling of everything I'd thought we were. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. My mind was too busy piecing together the wreckage, trying to figure out what came next. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was done. Not just with the marriage, but with the dance we'd been doing. The one where I kept hoping she'd change, where I kept swallowing my doubts for the kids' sake. I loved them too much to let this drag on, to let them grow up in a house built on quicksand. Divorce wasn't what I'd wanted, but staying felt like surrender. I waited until the kids were off to school. Emily was in the kitchen, avoiding my eyes, stirring oatmeal like it was a lifeline. I told her we needed to talk, really talk, and she nodded, resigned. I laid it out. I'd seen the emails, watched Caleb, heard her excuses. I wasn't guessing anymore, I knew. I said I was filing for divorce, that I'd fight for the kids, that she could have her freedom with Caleb or whoever else, but I was out. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. Maybe she'd known this was coming, or maybe she was just tired of pretending to. The next week was a blur of logistics. I called a lawyer, started sorting finances, told my boss I'd need some flexibility. Emily moved out quietly, crashing with a friend while we figured out the house. The kids took it hard. Lots of tears, questions I didn't have good answers for, but I promised them we'd be okay, that I'd always be there. It was the one thing I could still control. I thought that'd be the end of it. A clean break, painful but final. But life's got a way of throwing curveballs. A month later, I got a call from Emily's mom, frantic, saying Emily had checked into rehab, not the cheap one I'd found, but a fancy place an hour away. I didn't buy it at first, another act, I figured, but her mom insisted it was real, that Emily had hit rock bottom after I left. She sent me a letter Emily had written from there, addressed to me, no return address. I almost didn't open it. Part of me wanted to burn it, let her fade into the past. But curiosity, or maybe masochism, won out. It was short, messy, scribbled in pen. She said she'd lost herself years ago, that Caleb was a mistake she couldn't quit, that the pills started as an escape and became a trap. She didn't blame me, didn't ask me back, just said she was sorry, really sorry, and that rehab was her last shot to be the mom our kids deserved. No promises, no manipulation, just words. I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Pity? Relief? I'd spent so long seeing her as the villain, the mastermind, that this threw me. Was it genuine? Or one last play? I couldn't tell, and maybe it didn't matter. She'd broken us, broken me, and no letter could fix that. I tucked it away, didn't write back. The kids deserved a mom who'd fight for them, sure, but I wasn't her keeper anymore. Months passed. The divorce went through, messy but done. I got primary custody. Emily got supervised visits until she proved she was clean. My businesses started picking up, slowly, but enough to ease the debt. The kids adjusted, resilient little humans that they are, and the house felt lighter without the tension. I'd expected the story to end there. Me moving on, Emily fading into her choices, a cautionary tale wrapped up neat. Then came the twist I never saw coming. One Saturday, I was at the park with the kids when my phone buzzed an email from Caleb. No subject, just a block of text. He said he'd been with Emily, yeah, but she'd cut him off after rehab, that she'd told him everything, how she'd used him too, how it was over. He wasn't apologizing, just unloading, like I was his confessor. The kicker? He said she'd left town, no forwarding address, just a note to her mom saying she needed to start over somewhere new. No one knew where she'd gone, not Caleb, not her family, not me. I sat there, stunned, kids laughing in the background as I read it again. Emily, gone. Not dead, not relapsed, just vanished, like a ghost finally letting go. I braced for a fight, for drama, for her to claw her way back into our lives. Instead, she'd walked away, leaving me with the kids, the house, and a weird, hollow peace. I didn't know if she'd found redemption or just run out of moves. Maybe I'd never know. That night, I made dinner pancakes, because the kids begged, and we ate together, laughing at syrupy messes. The shadows were still there, sure, but they weren't choking me anymore. Emily's story wasn't mine to finish. For the first time in years, I felt the dawn, not the end I'd expected, but one I could live with.